good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm really thrilled to have with me as my guest Vid Prabhakaran, who's a partner at Davis Wright. Vid, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Richard.
So, Vid, let me start by asking you what motivated you to go to law school in the first place?
Yeah, the age-old question for everyone who's a lawyer. I didn't know what I was getting into.
Oh,
Like many, first generation attorneys, I didn't have any attorneys to talk to. I didn't have anybody in my family. I didn't know any attorneys. I went to
huh,
undergrad and started to meet attorneys, and the place where I was meeting them was actually in the political arena. Uh,
huh.
and so every, sort of politician that I was finding myself working for or campaigning on behalf of was a lawyer. And a lot of the folks that were running their campaigns were lawyers.
Huh.
And a lot of the big fundraisers who were, funding these campaigns were lawyers. And I was like, maybe makes a little sense to go and get a law degree. I had no idea what that was going to entail or really much about what I would use it for. But I thought, all right, I probably should go and do that. So that was actually what took me to law school, was this desire to be involved in the political arena, and figured law school would help with that.
Yeah, interesting. Well, how did you like law school when you got there then?
I loved it. I went into my first year really not understanding that there were these foundational subjects that I would be sort of thrown into. And I was really just kind of, figuring it out as I went. And so, I found the Socratic method to be pretty exciting and interesting. I
Hmm.
like reading. I thoroughly enjoyed the idea of analyzing a case and trying to get the holding out of that. So all of that was really fun. The rigor was not something I was prepared for.
Hmm.
And so I was certainly the student who came in the first day having lightly kind of read through the cases and getting grilled on my first day by my contracts professor was less than humbling, I think is the proper term. Um, but it was a tough introduction to law school, but I enjoyed the analysis, the process of being sort of a law student very much. And then the other thing that I naturally gravitated to in law school is that, much like business school, there's an element of networking that's sort of ingrained into going into law school. Like, not all, but a decent chunk of law students get that part of the experience is networking with your colleagues and networking with your fellow students. And I, definitely took full advantage of that. And I did very much enjoy that aspect of law school.
Hmm. Interesting. So at what point did you kind of figure out, so you're going to law school, what point did you figure out like what you're actually going to do with this law degree? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah. So, as I often tell folks, I fell backwards into the area of law that I practice in today.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in law school, the only thing I knew, I specifically went to Georgetown for law school because it was in DC. And I was like,
Mhm.
okay, politics, political stuff, I'm going to go to DC. I'd also had a political science background at Yale and found myself actually with a very unusual concentration in bureaucracy. And so the combination of the two of those made me feel like, all right, I should go where the government is, right? So I'm in DC and I'm like, all right, I don't know what kind of lawyer I want to be. All I kind of have a sense of is that I probably am not the courtroom guy. So I'm maybe not a litigator, but that's kind of the extent of what I knew. I didn't really know what kind of law that people did. And so I had some sense that maybe I wanted to do something government related. That was it. That's all I knew, government related.
Hmm.
And so I started trying stuff. And I clerked as a labor lawyer initially, working for a union, the national office of a union in DC. Didn't particularly like that. Didn't hate it, but didn't particularly like that. I thought, well, most of my network is South Asian, and the most common question that I get asked is about immigration. So maybe I ought to try that. And so my first summer after my 1L year was working for the immigration court in Miami.
Hmm.
which was a fascinating experience
Hmm.
and really a formative lawyering experience for me. But it also led me to absolutely hate immigration law with like every fiber of my being.
Uh-huh.
And frankly, the hate that I feel for immigration law fuels my pro bono practice today, because
Okay.
I cannot believe that we have a system that is so aimed at harming the very people that it's supposed to support.
Hmm.
And I find immigration law to be Byzantine and specifically designed to thwart the efforts of people who are trying to immigrate.
Yeah.
And so, as a result, I focus much of my pro bono attention at trying to help individuals navigate that system.
Yeah.
Um, so tried that, didn't like that. And then found myself in an administrative law class, at the beginning of 2L year. I'm thinking, okay, this is starting to feel right. There's a lot of policy involved in this. Not really sure exactly what kind of law I might want to do here, but I was enjoying the admin law aspects of it. Found myself at a firm in DC that did really only two areas of law: telecom law and aviation law.
Hmm.
And I somehow managed to talk my way into getting a summer job with them. The lawyer who hired me, who's still someone I chat with on a regular basis now, said basically that he was caught by the fact that I had this interest in bureaucracy and regulation, and
Hmm.
felt like a telecom lawyer or a potential telecom lawyer or a potential aviation lawyer would benefit from a background like that, and so took a chance on me.
Hmm.
And so that summer, I was doing telecom law and aviation law and thoroughly enjoyed it. I
Hmm.
thought, okay, this is really interesting, because what I was finding was you had these new technologies that were ramming right into what were old regulations that were meant to be focused on the technologies of yesterday. And so you were helping these clients navigate these old laws, and also promoting the change in those laws to catch up with the modern day. And so I was hooked. That was what I wanted to do. So I figured, okay, I'm going to be a telecom lawyer. I might do some aviation law on the side or whatever, but I'm going to be a telecom lawyer.
Hmm.
Um, Found myself not loving DC, and so decided, having moved all over the country as a kid, I was essentially an Army brat,
Mhm.
although
Oh.
my dad was a contractor, not in the actual military. And so what I ended up feeling like was home was California.
Hmm.
And so if you are going to be a telecom lawyer or an admin lawyer, frankly, in California, you kind of really only have two options. You either go to Sacramento, or you come to San Francisco, because the Public Utilities Commission happens to be here in San Francisco.
Hmm.
And so I found myself lucky enough to find a boutique law firm here in San Francisco. Unfortunately, no longer exists. But that boutique law firm was included about 8 professionals who solely practiced in front of the Public Utilities Commission.
Hmm. Hmm.
But they were generalists with that specialist focus. It was an interesting
Interesting.
mix. So they did energy law, they did water law, they did transportation law, and telecommunications. And
Hmm.
so the tying thread of that was that they're all regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission.
Hmm.
And so I found myself at this firm, and that's how I ended up being an energy lawyer. I typically describe myself as I'm primarily an energy lawyer, but I do about 75% of my work is energy. I do about 20% of my work for transportation, the transportation industry. And then I can still do water and telecom, and occasionally, even sort of strange intermediate kind of things as well. And I do a bit of that work as well.
Is your
So that's how
practice
it's done.
still exclusively in front of the Public Utilities Commission, or have you branched out beyond that now?
It's expanded. So, I mean, my bread and butter still remains practice in front of state agency and primarily the Public Utilities Commission.
Mhm.
But my interest in this intersection of technology with old regulation has led to a broader practice of helping companies that are finding themselves in that kind of moment where they're running up against, they have this new exciting new technology, and they're running up against old regs at wherever that might appear, whether that's at a local level, at a municipal level, at the state level. Oftentimes that is still in front of the Public Utilities Commission. Sometimes that's federally. And so, I am at a platform now at Davis Wright, which is a big national firm, 600 lawyers all over the country, where where I'm able to bring in colleagues from other arenas to help with these problems in a variety of jurisdictions, as opposed to just, San Francisco or California specific. So,
Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
So I'm not super familiar with that practice, but is that a practice where it's largely just advisory, or is there actually like litigation, or
Yeah.
what kind of legal work are you actually
Yeah,
doing?
so it's primarily administrative litigation.
Okay.
And so most of the work resembles litigation, but interestingly, the rules of evidence typically don't apply. And
Hmm.
so there's a great deal of policy-driven argument as opposed to
Hmm.
necessarily legal precedent. So a lot of it is just trying to explain to often a set of lay folks, but it'll be a combination of lawyers and engineers and accountants who often make up these regulatory bodies, make up the commissioners in these regulatory bodies, but trying to explain to them why something is ultimately in the public interest. And,
Hmm.
tying back to the very beginning of our conversation, why I decided to get into
Yeah.
law in the big first place, it was presumably, it was the sort of political arena, but, political arena was kind of a broad way of saying, I wanted to help people. Like, I wanted to do something that would impact people. And
Yeah.
I thought the best way to do that would be in the political arena. Well, I found out as a lawyer, there's a lot of ways you can impact people in a pretty meaningful way through regulatory policy. And so that's what I ultimately am doing on a day-to-day basis, is trying to convince a number of regulators that the best way that they can, in turn, support the broader public is by changing or interpreting various laws to open up the gates for potential technologies to come in and really impact and successfully improve people's lives. And
Yeah,
it's
interesting.
really great fun. And that's often today for me it's in the renewable industry and the climate and fighting climate change, but that also extends to things like autonomous vehicles, and it extends to rideshare and public transport and other avenues as well.
Yeah, interesting. So it also sounds like you get to work with a wide range of size of clients, right? You work with startups as well as larger companies because they all potentially face these regulatory hurdles.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's the great fun of this. Is my sort of portfolio of clients extend from, you know, I work for municipalities. I work for community choice aggregators, which is an accumulation of municipalities that have come together in order to procure energy. I work for utilities. I work for independent power producers. I work for global, rideshare companies. I work for small startup that are trying to take on the autonomous vehicle industry. I work for the big autonomous vehicle clients. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
And there's a number of folks who I also work for who are, uh, I oftentimes, when I describe my practice to folks, I will often say, I work for the dirtiest of the dirty to the cleanest of the clean. Everyone is trying to make a buck in the green future in California. And so,
Mm, mm.
much of the work that I'm doing, whether it is for the dirtiest of the dirty or the cleanest of the clean, is ultimately impacting the world by furthering our fight against climate change. And
Yeah.
so, you know,
Hmm.
it really
Interesting.
does allow for a wide variety of clients.
Do you find that since there aren't a lot of lawyers in the Bay Area that do what you do, that you sort of miss having more people that do what you do? Do you find it hard to have a conversation at your typical cocktail party, or do you kind of like being, the big fish in a small pond kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. So at cocktail parties, more often than not, I will, when somebody asks, what law firm I went to, what law firm I'm at, and I say, oh, I'm at Davis Wright Tremaine. I often start talking about our media practice, because our media practice is sort of the most well-known aspect that people hear about. It's like, and like then I can start talking about movies and books and the president, and all of a sudden they're like, interested. But then when I start talking, but increasingly now, when I talk about my practice, when I talk about energy policy, people actually light up because they're like, climate change is top of mind for so many folks, and what I do absolutely impacts
Yeah.
our efforts here in California to combat climate change. And so, it's actually pretty easy to talk about it now. I don't get into necessarily the weeds of my administrative law practice because then people start falling asleep. But yeah, no, I mean, I enjoy it, and there's actually more and more. The number of law students that I meet with on a monthly basis to chat about my practice is just, I mean, it's been exponential growth.
Yeah, yeah.
So many students are going to law school to do this work. And so now it's actually quite common that I'll go to a cocktail party and there will be somebody who has some connection to what I do. Certainly wasn't the case 10 years ago.
Well, you've obviously found or stumbled into an area of law that you obviously really enjoy. Could you ever see yourself doing something else, like I don't know, maybe an in-house job, or maybe actually, joining the government or something, something ancillary?
Yeah, no, as much as I love what I do, and I do, I also thoroughly enjoy the business of law. And so one of the aspects of doing this and that has kept me going has not been just doing my practice on a day-to-day basis and serving my clients, which does energize me. I also thoroughly enjoy helping run this law firm and helping grow this practice and helping grow the firm more generally. So I have this aspect of me that also is just sort of business minded, and so I can see myself doing more and more in the sort of business of law as well. And Richard, your own background strikes me as someone who had similar, like you enjoyed the practice, but then you also enjoyed the networks that you were establishing and the career progression for folks. And that I imagine was part of what ultimately led you to do the recruiting side of what you do. And I imagine now the podcasting side is also this desire to share the insights that you learn from networking from so many people. Like I have a similar story in that, like as I progress in my career, I'm like, okay, I have really enjoyed learning to be a lawyer. Now I'm really enjoying helping to set up a platform for lawyers to go out and do what they do best to impact the world. At some point, I think I will probably get to a point where I want to do that in the government kind of role and do something either, I could see very much use this expertise that I have now to, help do energy policy or transportation policy for, a state or federal level. That would be fun. I think I would enjoy that at some point in my career. But I have two young children. And so to some degree the golden handcuffs are on until I think they're in college.
Yeah. Well, Vid, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. If you ever do decide to do something like what you talked about, please come back and tell me about it.
That sounds great. All right, Richard. Pleasure chatting.
This is Richard Hsu and Vid Prabhakaran. Thanks.